9.
This map shows the ancient city of Philadelphia. Founded in 189 BC, the settlement sat precisely at the convergence of multiple major trade routes. That geographic advantage made it incredibly wealthy, earning it the title, the Gateway to the East. The economic engine driving that wealth was agriculture. The region produced massive crops of grapes, and the heavy profits from those vineyards funded a rapid outward expansion. Because the economy depended on the harvest, the Greek cult of Dionysus became the central religious force. Economic success and pagan worship were effectively the same thing. Dionysian worship was defined by secret feasts. These were civic rituals built entirely around wine and sexual indulgence, woven into the fabric of daily life. Philadelphia functioned as a heavily funded machine, a place where excess was not just common practice, but a culturally entrenched norm. The early Christian assembly stood in direct opposition to this machine. They were a remarkably small group, largely made up of the poor and the lower classes of society. Their faith required a difficult standard, absolute holiness. They were tasked with remaining completely separate from the sin and indulgence that defined their own city. They possessed what the letter calls little power. As a marginalized minority, they faced constant pressure to assimilate into the pagan networks or face total social and economic ruin. There was also the constant threat of the earth itself. In AD 17, a massive earthquake destroyed the city, and for years afterward, the population lived in fear of the relentless aftershocks that kept the stone architecture unstable. Their vulnerability was compounded by a local social threat. Many of these believers were Jewish by birth, but the local Jewish community had officially barred them from the synagogue. For the Jewish Christians in Philadelphia, their conversion to faith in Jesus had an immediate, devastating consequence. Expulsion was catastrophic. The synagogue served as the center of Jewish commerce and social life. Being barred meant instant exile, the loss of lifelong friends, immediate family, and the ability to earn a living. There is a bitter irony in this ostracization. The very name Philadelphia translates to brotherly love, originally honoring the king who built it, yet the city's core identity was entirely weaponized against the believers. Before a single Roman sword was drawn, the Christians were plunged into a socio-economic vacuum. This invisible siege was engineered to starve out a marginalized people and break their faith through sheer deprivation. The pressure escalated as the social starvation compounded into active, coordinated hostility from both their pagan neighbors and the Jewish community that had just thrown them out. The slander and opposition grew so fierce that Christ addressed it directly. He relabeled the local Jewish assembly a synagogue of Satan. Because they were actively persecuting believers, they were functioning as agents of the adversary. The constant slander eventually caught the attention of Roman officials, escalating the accusation against the Christians from a regional nuisance to the deadly charge of imperial treason. When the state finally stepped in, it bypassed standard law enforcement. Rome initiated a targeted, violent campaign designed for the total eradication of an unassimilated minority. The believers in Philadelphia were actively hunted. Once identified, they were dragged before tribunals, commanded to abandon their faith, and when they refused, they were systematically slaughtered by the state. Their loyalty was tested by regional waves of persecution that saw many Philadelphians hunted down and executed alongside famous martyrs in the surrounding cities. Despite possessing what Christ called a little power on earth, their ability to withstand intense pagan pressure, religious exile, and ongoing natural disasters proved the complete genuineness of their faith. This localized violence was part of a terrifying regional sweep. Many of the Christians in Philadelphia were caught up in the exact same dragnet that led to the execution of the early church leader, Polycarp, in neighboring Smyrna. Being tied to a post and burned alive at the stake was the Roman Empire's ultimate tool of psychological warfare. It was a public, agonizing spectacle, engineered to traumatize onlookers and enforce total behavioral control through absolute horror. Yet, staring into the smoke and embers, the Philadelphia Christians refused to break. In his letter, Christ explicitly commends them because they strictly kept his word and did not deny his name, even under the threat of agonizing death. For an assembly with little power, Their strength manifested as an uncompromising loyalty that stood firm even as the Roman state exhausted its capacity for violence. When you look at the letters to the 7 churches in Revelation, Philadelphia stands out. Christ intensely scrutinizes each assembly, yet for this traumatized group, he offers zero rebuke. He provides only profound comfort and commendation. He begins with a promise of total inversion. Christ guarantees that those who slandered and hunted them will one day be forced to come bow down at their feet, openly acknowledging that God loved this marginalized, hunted church. Jesus then identifies himself as the one holding the key of David. Whoever holds the key has the control. He is claiming absolute sovereign authority over salvation and eternity, an authority that completely supersedes the decrees of any Roman emperor. Because these Christians remained loyal during their local trials, Christ extends a promise that reaches a universal scale. He speaks of a coming hour of testing, destined to strike not just their city, but the entire world. This 7-year period, often identified as Daniel's 70th week, represents a global apocalypse where every inhabitant of the earth is tested. For the faithful, Christ guarantees an evacuation from this time, using the Greek phrase tereo ek, to signal their removal before the testing begins. To a population terrified of the next earthquake, he promised to make the faithful overcomer a permanent, unshakable pillar in the temple of God. And to those who had lost their earthly citizenship and family ties, he promised to write upon them the name of God, granting them permanent citizenship in the New Jerusalem. The historical aftermath proves the strength of their endurance. This disenfranchised church outlasted empires. They maintained an isolated Christian presence in conquered territory, withstanding heroic sieges and the spread of Islam, finally succumbing to the Ottomans in 1391. True spiritual power and a lasting legacy are never forged through cultural dominance or earthly wealth. For the church at Philadelphia, it was forged through unwavering perseverance and loyalty to the ultimate authority.
9.